session, so we keep more or less up to time. Steve Greenland has been here before, at least twice, just 3 or 4 times, and is going to talk to us about UKube-1 and other topics like FUNcube.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so I'm Steve Greenland. I'm a systems engineer at CloudSpace and also a PhD student at Strathclyde University. So it was about 5 years ago, I think, that I first came to an AMSAT Colloquium. It was about the same time that the whole idea of FUNcube was getting touted about, and I had a very interesting, slightly drunken conversation with Graham. And from that, my love of AMSAT and the professional amateur community, you guys are fantastic. So thanks for the support you've been giving us. UKube is really a collaboration of lots of willing participants, usually willing, that goes from kind of big primes like Astrium, now Airbus, UK Space Agency, government, small SMEs like Steepest Descent, which is a mobile phone ground station manufacturer, Bright Ascension, a new startup doing software. Lots and lots of different groups of people have kind of come together to contribute their knowledge and expertise. So to them, I'm grateful. So 5 years ago, what was happening? Well, we didn't have a UK Space Agency. There was the BNSC. We had discussed the idea that there should be a CubeSat in the UK. The company that I work for, CloudSpace, had just started producing CubeSat products, and so there was a CubeSat research network, which was kind of lots of people getting together and talking, and from that came the idea that we should do this UKube program. It wasn't called that. In fact, in Scotland it was called ScotSat for a while, but Salmon didn't back it, so not that you might see in the papers. So industry, university, working together to produce CubeSats. The BNSC at the time said that's a brilliant idea. We don't have any money. We might be able to fund one pilot launch and possibly provide tens of thousands for the for a flight model. So that's how it started. And lots of things have changed since then. The whole project was heavily constrained by resources, personnel, and timescales, and lots of decisions that were made along the way perhaps weren't the best, but they were the ones that we felt that we had to make at the time. With finally the objective of free launch, which was ultimately fulfilled this year on the 8th of July, which was actually 1 day after, from 5 years from when the proposal was due. So it went from proposal to space in 5 years rather than the 12 months that we originally intended. The reason why I know that is that my daughter was also born on the same day. So on the 7th of July, when the proposal was due, I left the original proposal in a USB jiffy bag on the front windscreen of one of the other engineers at CloudSpace to get him to submit it. So I'm very glad that he did, else we wouldn't be here today. So in March 2011, then the program had got to the point where we were ready to say, well, we think that we want to open this out. So we invited proposals from across the UK. There were 22 proposals that were received in quite a small timescale, kind of indicating the level of interest, of which 4 were selected to kind of go forward after a selection program managed by the UK Space Agency. And then from July 2011, then the program organization changed again, and CloudSpace took on kind of more of the management responsibility. So it really had 5 core mission objectives: to demonstrate new UK space technology, to demonstrate that useful science could be performed in a CubeSat-sized spacecraft. Perhaps that's not so required anymore because we've been overtaken by events, the likes of Planet Labs and many other people, QB50 in terms of science. But 5 years ago, then, whenever we mentioned CubeSats, then people just shook their heads that they wouldn't ever be useful. And so that's where that requirement comes from. Demonstrate industry, university-based training. Myself, I've kind of teetered on the edge between universities and industry for these 5 years now. which has been really fascinating, and trying to run kind of training both for the engineers at CloudSpace and also to spin that out into the university. Demonstrate outreach in STEM subjects. Really, we had no budget for that, and so again, we must say thanks to AMSAT-UK for supporting that area of the project, and to demonstrate payload kickoff to flight-qualified spacecraft in less than 12 months, which is a little bit embarrassing now. The actual time was about 2.5 years if you measure it from payload kickoff to when we were ready to launch. But still, it's a long way off. So just to quickly run through some of the payloads, you will have seen these slides before if you've come to an AMSAT Colloquium before. We've got C3D, which is an imager. It's also looking at radiation damage on the CMOS technology, which has particular applications for future ESA missions, in particular the Jupiter icy moons. We've got TOPCAT, which is measuring the shifts caused by ionospheric effects in the L1 and L2 bands for GPS. And then secondarily, it interfaces with our ADCS, or it was intended to. That was a functionality that we had to take out. Janus, which is an Astrium payload, which uses space radiation to generate random numbers, which can then be used for telecommunications. More importantly, really, for Astrium, it was an opportunity to fly non-space grade SRAM FPGAs for the first time. The mission interface computer, this was produced by a local company within Glasgow, looking at reliability and radiation-tolerant designs. They've kind of got to the point, they've just been bought by MathWorks, so they're not looking for partners for further development anymore. They have a fairly large company backing them. FUNcube Transceiver, I won't go into this at all. Deployable solar arrays for CloudSpace, obviously we very much interested in power systems, and so developing new hinges and new ways of packing the satellite and deploying the panels was quite key. And again, with that, having some sort of attitude control so that we can start developing pointing, especially sun pointing modes, to maximize the power, so that then we can put that all into the downlink to get the data down. Coupled with that then, working with the CPUT in South Africa, FSATI, a high data rate transmitter, which on UKube is 1 megabit per second, although they've increased the rates on later versions. Onboard software produced by Bright Ascension. We tried to make it as compatible as possible with CCSDS standards, so use the packet utilization scheme with the idea that with software-defined radios in the future, then we could be compatible with some of the ESA standard ground stations and so cooperate with those. And so a lot of work went into kind of the operations that go on board, the file-based data transfers, LDTs, and so forth. And then really, with all the onboard technology, we were a startup, and we didn't have anything to support the general integration of a satellite. So developing the tools and jigs that we would need to kind of go from nothing to having a full satellite. So here we can see on your bottom right, the interface emulator. We defined requirements for each of these 4 payloads and sent them aboard, which was an interpretation of those requirements on the knowledge that when anyone sees a huge document, it's very difficult to get someone then to follow it exactly how you intended. So having this board meant that we could test what truth was. Sometimes it turns out that we deviated more from the requirements than the payloads, but at least there was always a check in place to catch that. The FlatSat boards, so that we could begin integrating the satellite, and then once we got to environmental tests, then for holding the satellite and performing vibe and so forth. Another slide, just capturing the interface emulator. This is something which the Space Agency and we're very interested in pursuing in the future. Originally, we used Arduinos. The reason for that was that it was lots of open source software. So for those who hadn't ever developed anything before, then it was another way of just kind of opening up access for people, and we provided source code for the interface commands as a starting point. So just to kind of summarize where we were at the end of 2011, which was where we kind of went through CDR, and at that point it was when the money was released to buy some of the flight hardware. So we started finding out whether the designs which were done on paper really did match the designs of the subsystems, and there was a huge learning process at that point. We had lots of workshops with the various different payloads, but also with the likes of ISIS, who came over and taught us how to use their transceiver, GomSpace, who showed us the OBC, and we worked with them to learn really every subsystem as we could. Here you can see two of the different payloads, C3D going through, and we were checking that the solar panels, the holes, would line up, and exactly the same with TOPCAT, with the GPS. By that stage then, we developed a process that we could go through to accept subsystems, and so we ran through that at a delivery stage and started building up the flatsat that you can see in the bottom slide to put the satellite together. On the advice of certain persons here, then we tried as fast as possible to go into end-to-end testing to try and get to characterize the link and to start doing as much commanding as possible. We encountered lots of difficulties at this stage, found out how much we didn't really know about both the RF side of things, but also on the operations concept. Because we'd started from the point of we want a satellite, we're going to open it up to different payloads, then we hadn't spent a lot of time defining that overall operations concept once those payloads had been accepted. And so that was a bit of a learning process that we encountered there. Systems integration, lots of wires which eventually reduced down, thermal cycling and deployments, thermal vacuum, then to RF patterns, where we again learned a little bit more about RF, and I think last year I was here talking about this and thanking all of those involved who helped us get through that. So it was then finished in about July, or just after July, August 2013, and then there was the lull that we wait for launch and hope that it stops moving further and further away from us. And our launch eventually ended up being in July 2014. So we went out to Baikonur. That was a pretty amazing experience, and prepped the satellite. There wasn't too much to do. There was the removal of one pull pin and the resetting of a flag in software, so that then when it woke up, then it knew that it was in the space mode. So nerve-wracking. Even with that one software change, then we did manage to arm it slightly early, but we recovered from that pretty quick. Integration. Something that they don't tell you is how difficult it is to hold something that is actually quite light, 6 kilos, whilst you're kind of teetering over the edge of a gantry, trying to bolt it onto a frigate, and not dropping anything, and thinking about quite how much it's worth, and looking around you with lots of Russian engineers taking pictures of you. So that was I think the sweatiest we've ever been, trying to integrate that. But we got there, and it was bolted on. And then we took a few surreptitious snaps of the frigate integration hall, which then we got told by Roscosmos that we weren't allowed to take any kind of pictures because of the different payloads which were on board. And then straight away the pictures that they'd taken showed up on the internet the next day. So it was interesting. So current status. The satellite was launched on the 8th of July on the Soyuz 2.1B. Meteor was the main payload. Very grateful at this point for the amateur community support in getting the right orbit elements. It's now called UKube-1, but originally then we were trying to figure out which of the NORAD TLEs, and then before that, exactly what the TLEs might be. So there was a huge learning process there. We actually heard the first Morse beacon on the first pass, and now we're in the commissioning process. We have about 4 good passes per day in the morning and the late evening. Ours is not the huge Gibraltar dish, it's the small Yagis. Operations performed well so far. Yeah, we've got the health beacon. We've got used to tracking, and we've learned a lot about Yaesu rotators and how to get them working. We've received and processed telemetry packets. I have to thank Mike in the audience for picking up the first packets before we did. So thanks for that. We've demonstrated uplink command capability, very low spin rates since deployment. We the satellite actually woke up in redundant comms mode. So it has two transceivers on board, the FUNcube transceiver and the primary transceiver. What we believe happened is that the signal from the ANT-S, which tells this computer the deployment state, was lost. And so as a result, the computer did what it was supposed to do, which is to switch on the FUNcube board, because we understood that that one would operate whether or not the antennas were deployed. And so it switched that on. And so when it came overhead, then actually the FUNcube-2 board was on. So for those of you who heard that, then thanks for getting that data into the warehouse for us and kind of keeping us updated about that. We've had now reports of the beacon being active all over, and we've got to the point where we can do some large data transfers on board. It's not been without teething problems and challenges, however. The two kind of main ones that we're working through at the minute is how to operate the satellite when we don't necessarily have a full duplex link that we're expecting. And secondarily, we occasionally see resets on board, and how to patch the software so that, or the configuration of the software, so that we won't see that. But we're working through that, and then we'll be moving into payload commissioning, hopefully next week, and then into initial payload operations. So to go back to the start, well, what about the objectives? And just before launch, then the UK Space Agency again started thinking about whether it was happy with what we'd achieved. So there was an independent review panel that was formed, and we all went down and presented our cases for what we'd done, and they listened. Interestingly, the objectives that they rated against weren't the objectives that I'd been presenting for 5 years, but that goes to show what happens when interfaces keep changing. So in terms of demonstrating new UK space technology, we've had a fantastic amount of collaboration with various different parties. For Clyde Space, it's been brilliant. For the likes of Bright Ascension and Open University, they're all now developing different products. Certainly haven't got their return on investment yet, I would say. But in terms of developing the infrastructure so that we can move forward, then I think that's been quite successful. Demonstrate the capability of performing useful science. Well, we've got these payloads on board, and we're looking forward to commissioning them. In addition to that, then we've had 2 PhD theses and numerous research papers which have been presented on it. Industry university-based training within Clyde Space, and there's been over 20 engineers who have been involved. At times, that has actually been more of a challenge than having just a couple of core people. Trying to work with a couple of people for a few months and then getting someone else has been quite difficult for keeping track of what's going on. And engaging with the Astrium review team has been fantastic in terms of getting experience of what an ESA review might be like, but at times was a little bit difficult to deal with at the same time as trying to put together the satellite and learn all the things that we needed to. Numerous student projects at Strathclyde, especially in thermal, RF. We installed a ground station there. Unfortunately, that was subject to a fire a couple of years ago, and I think probably by the end of this year we should have it recommissioned again. So we've bounced back from that. Demonstrate education outreach in STEM subjects, where we've got the engagement with FUNcube-1. Open University themselves had some budget for doing C3D imager demonstrations and went to various classrooms. Students for the Exploration and Development of Space developed a payload. Unfortunately, it didn't fly in the end because it couldn't be delivered within the timescales. We got involved in various arts business grants. We managed to put models in as many different places as possible to promote the CubeSat message. And I think we were getting somewhere until David Willits left just the other week. So we'll see what happens with the new minister. So overall, the panel perceived that that we'd fully met the initial objectives in 2 areas and partially met them in others. And amazingly, it was found to be within UKSA budget, but they never actually said what that budget was. So I'm kind of curious about that. So where's the lessons? Well, we're still learning, especially in terms of operations. And I'm sure we will keep learning for the foreseeable future. But the main design lessons, well, don't spend too long designing based on specification. I think we did. We didn't have enough budget at the time for an engineering model, and so we didn't buy one. We tried to do everything on spec to get through to CDR, and then after that buy the equipment that we needed. And at that point then it turned out that parts of the design decisions weren't really relevant with the equipment we were using. I've mentioned already the ConOps. We should have defined that earlier once we knew what the payloads were and used that to drive design. That's particularly important on the software side of things for the software engineers to really understand the architecture that we're working with. Launch provider requirements vary considerably. We did a whole raft of documentation that we thought would be required when we finally got to launch to make sure that we had trackability and traceability. And then when we got to meet Roscosmos, they didn't want to see anything. So that was we tried to show them as much as possible. Actually, I was a bit too enthusiastic. And possibly the flip side, document everything. Yes. What we found was that we didn't have a big enough team to keep all the documents that were produced up to date, and that became quite damaging as the project progressed and as the times went on and engineers came and left the project. And that was a real challenge, especially towards the end, just managing the amount of knowledge that was there, but in so many different documents. So kind of consolidating around some key core documents would be the lesson. In terms of the integration and test, then the emulator definitely identified lots of issues that we saw, and then that allowed us, when the payloads actually got delivered, to work with them to solve those. Without an engineering model, or without a comparable system, then it was very difficult to determine whether it was software or hardware root causes of systems. So again, it's just another argument for engineering models. I2C can be very temperamental, but I understand that once it's used correctly, then it's good, and it's a low cost, low overhead data bus to use. Harness accommodation. We knew that it was going to be tricky to get all of the harnesses in. We budgeted for it as much as possible, and still it was worse than we thought. So we underestimated there. Definition of computer operating systems and trying to make sure that everyone is agreed which version of Ubuntu, which version of Debian they were using, so that didn't then become one of the things that we had to start debugging during test. And EM/FM setups, I've said it. I think that's the third time saying it. Yeah, we needed an engineering model without doubt, and nothing beats end-to-end testing. In terms of review and quality, well, the review points posed a significant challenge. That was really due to the resources we had available. So we got fantastic feedback from the team at Astrium, but in terms of responding to the number of technical questions that they posed to us, it would really stop the project for a number of months while we just figured out what the answers to them were, and then hopefully get back to what the design was and all the issues that we were trying to deal with as well. So that kind of left some inefficiencies in how we dealt with that. Certainly true that when we transferred management to ClydeSpace, then there were gaps left in some of the oversight and interfaces, and because of the way the contracts were constructed, which were all to the UK Space Agency, then we kind of had to have small kind of cabals of decision makers rather than having kind of a traditional prime working and then flowing down requirements and things. Risks and issues registers, obviously we managed to generate in the end quite a comprehensive list that we're now using to move forward, and that's been made available for others to use in their projects. Definition and agreement of what high risk is. This was a constant kind of battle, really, since the project was announced as a higher level project than we originally intended. Our initial vision of success was just getting something in space and hearing a beep and perhaps getting a few packets of telemetry. Then it became payloads and what needs to be politically delivered. Funding lessons. Personally, I completely underestimated the costs and where the costs would actually lie. It was difficult to manage relationships when we didn't have a contractor-subcontractor kind of model. Differences in availability of funding sources, because we tried to tie lots of little pots of money together, then that tended to cause quite big impacts when they didn't tie in particularly well. And really, lots of things just are impossible to avoid. Space does cost money at times. I'll skip through. There's probably a few too many lessons. The future for UKube. So we've gone through this process. We've learned lots of lessons. We're still learning them. We were hoping really very soon to hear what the government position would be, but there's now kind of a bit of a moratorium on that for the time being. So what are we doing? Well, to follow on really on the theme that we didn't have just a base system to start with, then we've defined the idea that we should have these standardized systems which are available throughout the UK that potential developers of either subsystems, technology subsystems, or payload subsystems for missions can come and start doing testing. This could be software, it could be hardware. And so we've got standard setups. And we're just starting to deliver these now. Really grateful for the support of Catapult. Chris is here at the moment, and UK Technology Astronomy Centre, and my funders, the Royal Commission, for kind of backing this idea. Coupled with that is software to go with it so that we can do more rapid design assessments. We can perform feasibility analysis, looking at kind of which boards should go together, and then feeding that into the real hardware and the operations of it. So we're working with a few kind of lead-in payloads just to work through the bugs in the system and the process that we need in order to enable this. The first being use of quantum technologies in space, in particular a single photon source to be used for quantum key distribution in secure telecoms. And then also that's led through to some really interesting discussions about how to miniaturize atomic clocks so we could have networks of atomic clocks flying in space, more accurate than the ones on GPS. Lead-in applications again in biosciences, looking at how we can perform biosciences in very small structures using 3D printing. This is with Cranfield University. And returning to the idea of CMOS sensing, there's a whole raft of different applications for that, and just using the heritage system that we've got. So to conclude then, really, UKube-1 has completed the majority of its objectives before reaching the launchpad. I wrote that conclusion before the launchpad. And it's still meeting them. We're encountering some challenges, but I think that we will overcome those. Key lessons from the mission development have been captured, and hopefully will feed through when a new stage in this development is defined. And operations is beginning, and we are learning how to use the satellite for the first time. So all that remains really is to say an enormous thanks to really everyone here, in particular the FUNcube team. We really wouldn't be here without you. And in particular, this time round at my visit to the AMSAT Colloquium, then I've got to be saying thank you to the operators who have been supplying us with data. So Mike, who's based in Germany, Todd in the US, and Colin in Australia, and of course Graham Shirville, who has really been a good friend to the project and given me a kick sometimes when I haven't done something that's required, and that was definitely needed. So thanks, Graham.
Come on, testing, thanks. Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions. Anyone want to lead off? Akim. Yeah.
I was wondering if the S-band downlink is already working, it's already operational, and if it is it public?
Okay, no, it's not operational yet, but it might be getting commissioned a bit sooner than we initially planned. We weren't planning on running that until a bit later. One of the ways that we can get around some of the issues that we're seeing in having a full duplex link, at the minute we can only really run in half duplex, is that we could use the S-band to transmit a lot of the data down. So we're in discussions about how we could bring that forward, and when we do, then that information will be distributed. So thanks for asking that. Yeah, these are some other ways. We're working on an updated version of the FUNcube dashboard, which will work with UKube, which will have better telemetry equations than it has at the minute, and also it will pass through the data to our operations center so that they can see the results in addition to the warehouse. So anyone who can collect data from that would be fantastically useful. Any reports of beacons, that's helping us really debug exactly when we're seeing issues and why they might be occurring. Modifications, we have some demodulation software. I don't know whether anyone would fancy having a look at it for us and seeing whether or not they could improve that. It's based in GNU Radio. And lastly, operations of the satellite over weekends and other downtime. If there is things that people want to perform, then I think by working with us and RAL Space, then we can do that. And we've already successfully shown that we can do that at the weekends. So.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any other questions other than from the internet? Have you got any internet ones? Okay, just bear with me a sec.
Got one question from the internet. How often do you experience OBC resets, and what do you think is the likely cause?
Okay, it's actually, or as far as we know, and we're probably, I would say, about 95% sure. We haven't managed to get quite enough data to confirm it. That it's an I2C issue. We're seeing it about every 50 minutes on average. Some orbits or some periods, and we don't see any, and then there'll be a lot of them. And it's a hard reset, so we see the OBC go down, but it's the EPS which is catching that the I2C has got a problem, and then resetting the satellite.
Steve, thanks very much. Sorry, I saw silent by here. Thanks, Steve, very much, Steve, for that update. And we'll see you next year, hopefully. Many luck with good luck with the commissioning. Thank you very much. We're now going to get a quick belt, if that's the right word, from Graham on FUNcube-3, I guess.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Which should take 5 minutes, I'm told.
Right. Just coming back on FUNcube-2, there were a couple of other questions on the internet which I saw before I came up to the front here. It does look like the operations are a bit random at the moment. Steve has already said that maybe we can start using or just testing out the FUNcube-2 payload at weekends. In fact, those of you who, if anybody did check last weekend, Jim commanded the FUNcube-2 transponder on with their prior agreement, and I can report that the transponder certainly works because I saw my signal coming through it. The passband looks just like FUNcube-1, so we know that part works. But in terms of actually opening it for general use, I think that's some way off yet. In terms of the dashboard, there is under development a FUNcube-2 version of the dashboard, which again has not yet been issued or put out into the public domain because it's not yet quite right. Some of the telemetry channels aren't reading the right numbers. And Duncan, who you've heard referred to earlier, from our software team, has gone to visit his sister in New Zealand for 4 weeks, about half an hour ago. I think he caught his flight. So that may delay us a bit. So that's the FUNcube-2. Okay, FUNcube-3. The FUNcube-3 payload or the FUNcube-3 system is on there's all these acronyms, QB50 precursors. We talked about this last year. There's been quite a lot in Oscar News about the precursor satellites of the QB50 constellation. They are two UKubesats which were launched in the end of June, and they're up there and flying now. We have not yet tested the FUNcube-3 payload on P1, the precursor one. Neither has Gerard been able to test their AMSAT France payload on P2. But this is just a very, very quick, I promise, a very quick update. This is actually an ISIS presentation because there's sort of commercial stuff around what's happening on these precursor flights. I asked ISIS, who are part of the consortium, the QB50 consortium, to let me have some slides. So I will talk to the slides and try not to ad-lib too much, therefore not embarrassing anybody. So first 4 weeks of in-orbit operations. They're up there, they're working, they're transmitting. You can see them if anybody has an SDR covering the top end of 2 meters, you'll see all the signals all the time when they come over. The downlinks both have got strong signals. There is some tumbling and some fading. The eventual intent is to operate them at 9K6. They've achieved that, but only so far at high elevation passes. The uplink commanding is very good most of the time. There is some fading as the satellites are spinning. Thermal, they've got some quite good data on thermal. P1 appears to be warmer than P2. I don't think anybody quite knows why, but 5 or 10 degrees a bit warmer. Lots of temperature data there, which I won't bore you with. These ones are quite interesting. This is P1, and it's just battery temperature, panel temperature, and PA temperature. The battery temperature are the lower ones. The middle one there is the PA temperature, and the external panel temperature is the higher one. Look like numbers pretty similar to what we have on FUNcube-1. Much too difficult there. Again, the similar sets of numbers for P2, but they're all sort of 5 or 10 degrees lower than P1. Batteries, the satellites are power positive, seem to be fully charged most of the time. Attitude, these have got active attitude control or active attitude determination and control systems, and I think it's fair to say that they're still getting to learn how to drive the control systems. They detumbled P1, although I think it sort of spun up again when they took their eye off that ball for a time. Generally, I believe that the spin rate is higher than they would have expected. Some more screens that you can't possibly read. So we've got attitude control, the next steps. There's some negative numbers coming up, not quite sure why on some. It appears that the two spacecraft, although theoretically fairly similar, they've got different science payloads on them, but most of the subsystems and buses are all the same. They seem to be different in space, so they're proceeding cautiously. The other difference is that P2 doesn't reboot, but P1 does. And I'm not sure we're going to have a world record for the number of reboots per spacecraft per day, QB50, whatever. I'm not sure, but it's certainly, there are occasions when P1 reboots quite a lot of times. Obviously, that needs to be worked through. There's some new software being uploaded to overcome this, and there's a whole plan to upload different releases of flight software. But that, of course, at 1K2 is quite a long process. So there's more work needs to be done on detumbling on P2 as well. So there's a longer-term plan there for release of uploading more software to both improve the stability of the software and to enable all the basic science units to start operating. Now, the end of that is, after they've done all that, then the plan is that on both P1 and P2, the amateur payloads will then be switched on. What we're not sure is whether they'll, as part of the testing of all the operation of all the science units, whether they'll actually permit the transponders to be switched on and tested like the other units. So that may occur in the next few months. When pushed as to, well, when will they be transferred to be transponders? I hear different numbers, and I'm not asking anybody to sort of, please don't take the words that I say as fact, because there are no facts, but probably 6 months. So maybe somewhere early 2015, mid-2015, 6 to 12 months is what we're being told. So that's something to look forward to in the future. Like UKube, they're in relatively nice high orbits, not high enough for David for decent long-distance communications, or for Drew, who would like them up to be higher, but they assuming that the spacecraft hardware works and the software carries on working, they are there for a good number of years, 15, 20 years maybe. So just be patient for the next few months, and then we'll have a long-term opportunity to use them as transponders. But FUNcube-3 is only a transponder. There is no telemetry on that. It's only the two boards. That was over 5 minutes, I'm sure, but thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Steve. Graham was boasting last night that he'd arranged it such he wasn't doing any speaking this colloquium, and I sort of believed him, hence I was slightly unexpectedly when he was saying something, but that was good stuff. Thanks very much, Graham. I'll just take one quick question, if there is one, at least I won't, but Graham might. On QB50? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Graham. Pardon? What's for dinner? What's for dinner? That's not a question on QB50. Okay. We'll move swiftly on then.